And the topic of our next session will be securing clean EU supply chains. So please join me in welcoming to the stage the moderator of this panel, Mr. Ignacy Niemczycki, the State Secretary at Chancellery of the Prime Minister of Poland. And the panelists that will talk about the next topic. Mr. Denis Redonnet, Deputy Director General from DG for Trade and Economic Security, European Commission. Ms. Susanne Waidzunas, Global Supply Manager at IKEA. Ms. Bernd Schäfer, CEO and Managing Director of EIT Raw Materials. And Mr. Ludovic Voet, Confederal Secretary at European Trade Union Confederation. The stage is yours. I give it over to the moderator.
Hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to have you here in Rzeszów, and we have a great panel ahead of us. We only have 50 minutes, so we have to make it short and sweet. The title of this panel is Securing Clean EU Supply Chains, and I believe that by now, everyone around the world, that's my hope, has learned that the motto of the Polish presidency is Security Europe. And the aim of this particular session is to identify policies and business strategies to ensure the resilience of EU supply chains. And resilience is very much about security as well. Let me just remind ourselves who are we joined with. We have Denis Redonnet from the European Commission, Deputy Director General for Trade and Economic Security. We have Susanne Waidzunas, Global Supply Manager at IKEA Group. We have Bernd Schäfer, CEO and Managing Director of EIT Raw Materials. And we have Ludovic Voet, Confederal Secretary, European Trade and Union Confederation. So we have very different views on the topic that we'll be discussing. And first, I wanted to ask my panelists to give a short opening statements. And my question would be, what are the key current and emerging vulnerabilities in the EU supply chains today? Denis, you want to start?
Sure. Thank you very much for the invitation for the panel. I would want to stress before getting into the vulnerabilities that, of course, there are a lot of opportunities linked to globalized value chains for the EU, for our economic fabric, because of the efficiency effects, because they underpin global competitiveness beyond the single market, however important the single market is, and they connect us to some of the important sources of external growth worldwide. I'm thinking, for example, about the pull factor on economic growth of the Indo-Pacific region, for example, where we are trying to deepen our economic integration. But it's true that, and the Commission, we have been trying to monitor this for several years now, after the COVID shock, but even before that. There are pockets of our interlinkages with the global economy where we have too high degree of concentration, for example, of our imports on certain origins. That creates certain dependencies which can be sources of vulnerabilities when it is too costly or too difficult to reduce and mitigate these dependencies, and that can be the case. But you need there really active policies, in some cases stockpiling or procurement type rules to deal with that. And where those dependencies can be, in a more geopolitical world, weaponized against the European Union member states. That is a reality, in the sort of new geoeconomics of today. So I think that, to me, is one of the important vulnerabilities in the supply chains that we've got to look at. It's the examination of this is central to the European Union's economic security strategy, which is being taken forward to mitigate those dependencies on the basis of proper assessment of risks, so an assessment of those risks in the industrial supply chains and an assessment of the risks of weaponization thereof. It's very clear that these vulnerabilities are limited in terms of the totality of our integration with the rest of the world. 4 years ago, different parts of the Commission had actually done a first assessment of this. I mean, trying to look at the structure of our external trade. We identified at the time that the maximum of something like 0.6, 0.7% of our total imports were on product codes which were to be considered as vulnerable on the basis of what
5
I
seconds
indicated.
remaining.
A lot of that, and I will finish with that, has got to do with critical raw materials. Not only, but fundamentally, a lot of that has got to do with critical materials, which are, of course, essential for the green industrial transition, and we'll come back to that.
Thank you. So what I wrote down is weaponization of dependencies and critical raw materials. Susanne, go ahead, 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. No, I would like to start with saying that Europe is a very important market for IKEA. We're a multinational company, but more than 70% of our sales sits within the European markets, and 70% of what we sell today is also produced and sourced in Europe. So Europe is an important market for us. I would like to point out 3 vulnerabilities that we see in our supply chain, and we are committed to halve our emissions when it comes to carbon and the climate footprint by 2030 from the 2016 baseline, and then continue our journey as well when it comes to becoming net zero by 2050. And today, more than 50% of the climate footprint for IKEA sits within materials. And up to 70-80% of the product is also, the cost is coming from materials. So materials is really the bigger focus for us. And here, of course, for Europe then, the availability and the accessibility of affordable recycled materials as a feedstock for us moving forward is critical. And of course, for our ranges, then we focus a lot on the recycled, or the availability of recycled wood, metals, textiles, plastic, and glass. So the infrastructure, investments in that infrastructure is critical moving forward. Then secondly, for our manufacturing, but not only manufacturing, our operations in logistics and retail is suffering already today when it comes to the labor shortage that we are facing in Europe. So that would be another one that also calls for more and an acceleration of the automation and the robotics, not only in manufacturing, but in all the processes that we have, also administrative processes. And thirdly, on the transportation side, we are on a journey to zero emission also when it comes to transportation. We have 50% today of land transportation on rail, the rest goes on truck. So the electrification and investments in infrastructure, in grid capacity, is also crucial for us and our supply chain.
Thank you. So 3 points: affordable recycled materials, automation, and electrification and transport. Yeah?
Correct. Thank
All
you.
right, go ahead. Thank you, Bernd.
Yeah, okay, let us not mince words. I think Europe is already entering into raw materials crisis, and this is no longer theoretical. I mean, just this week we saw China curbing export rates on rare earths and rare earths containing materials critical for many production and ecosystems. So from everything from electric motors, MRIs, wind turbines, missile guidance systems, all very sensitive applications for this. And this has already forced firms and companies to shut down and discontinue their production flows. And I think this is pretty dramatic. It's more than a call for action. And the German Handelsblatt this week also confirmed that several German companies are already affected, but that's not about Germany. I mean, this is really about Europe across the continent, from battery factories in Hungary and Sweden to magnet supply chains in France and Italy. Entire segments of the European manufacturing are now hostage to Beijing's licensing decisions. We should be very clear on this one. This is not about China bashing. It's a consequence of the licensing policy of the Chinese government. And China controls, just as an example, 90% of global rare earth processing. In April, it imposed sweeping export restrictions that are already delaying deliveries to Europe, automotive, electronics, and defense sector. And even for those shipments that were exempted from these restrictions, the transportation is still stuck in limbo because of very opaque bureaucratic control systems there. So we have to really change this, address this, and that's not about only imbalances in the market. This is clearly about geopolitical leverage. And here we are, I think, Denis, you mentioned this before, we are witnessing a weaponization of supply chains. In response, we must now anchor Europeans' resilience, in our view, on a 5-pillar strategy. So this goes clearly from responsible extraction and material processing to industrial circularity, global partnerships that deliver and go beyond just MOUs, innovation and technological sovereignty, and last not least, it's all about people, skills, talents, and EU identity, as opposed to siloed corporate identity.
Thank you, Bert. And I'll be asking about the details later, but what I wrote down is that the situation is really urgent, and those dependencies that Denis were talking about before are really something that we have to deal with here and now. Thank you. Ludovico, your opening statement. Go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you for the invitation. For workers, the two threats we see, there's a dual threat we see, is first the loss of industrial employment and the growing strategic dependency, and of course it's the consequence is the lack of autonomy in the EU. First, on the industrial employment losses, I think, yes, part of the discussion is the geopolitical threat, and I will come back, I think, in the debate to that. But if we take, since the 2008 crisis, 2.5 million jobs, industrial jobs, have disappeared in the EU. If we take since the COVID crisis, 1 million industrial jobs, almost 1 million industrial jobs have disappeared in the EU. So it's before tariffs, it's before geopolitical threats, it's before the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And this is happening in key sectors where our workers are, in the automotive sector, in the construction sector, in the chemical sector, etc. So this threat for us is the essential one, and the speed of destruction is, I think, we're at the beginning of a wave of more massive destruction of jobs if nothing is done, because the speed is like of these numbers I quoted is 500 jobs a day. So 500 jobs a day, it's not nothing. It's not nothing because it's workers, it's their skills, it's the industrial capacity, it's our ability to produce in Europe. It's SMEs that are affected by these closures, that are the backbone of the supply chain. And then it's also regions that are affected, of course, because when jobs disappear in one region, all the ecosystem around these industries also are more fragile. So yes, we have geopolitical risk, but we have also to look at the essential difficulties in the industrial sector. Here, maybe we will come back, I guess, in the debate to that, but what is missing today is investments. Private investments and public investments, which are constrained by fiscal consolidation, which doesn't really then allow the massive investment needs that we have for the reindustrialization and the decarbonization agenda. What we miss also is a protection mechanism of jobs. The SURE mechanism was activated during the COVID-19 crisis. It saved 27 million jobs. Of course, it was an external shock. Here we have risk of external shocks with tariffs, and we could do a better mechanism, like a SURE 2.0 mechanism that would stabilize and protect jobs in Europe, cushioning economic shocks, but also linking it to investing in skills, allowing the necessary investments in the decarbonization of the companies affected, and investing in the research and development. I think this is essential. Just one example for that. 3 days ago, one company in
5 seconds.
Okay, then it will be for the next question.
Great, thank you. We really have to be on time here, sorry for that. What I wrote down is, and it's quite striking, 500 jobs a day, and that we need mechanisms to protect industrial jobs. Just one remark, the invasion of Russia on Ukraine started way before 2021, just to make it clear. Denis, I wanted to ask you about trade and direct investment. How can we use trade partnerships and EU diplomacy as tools to reroute critical supply chains across like-minded partners? Is there a need for EU industry to diversify its export markets? And if so, how can EU policy support them?
Yeah, I think the diversification in any case is the first port of call for resilient supply chains. Now, trade policy does help provide frameworks for helping economic operators, supporting economic operators in doing that. I mean, first, we already have today, the EU has one of the largest network of preferential free trade agreements in place. Now, these are useful because they stimulate our integration with the rest of the world. They provide a cushion as well in face of shocks. Actually, we've seen this. You were mentioning Russia's aggression of Ukraine. That has led, of course, to a hard decoupling of a large part of our trade relations with Russia, which before the war was the EU's fifth largest trading partner. We were exporting 90 billion euros worth of goods every year to Russia. Now, what we've seen when you look at the trade numbers, is that you see that the existence of the preferential trade agreements have enabled us to actually reorient our trade, limiting the cost of that decoupling from Russia, with, in particular, the preferential trade partners. In 2022, the import increases from Canada, for example, with whom we have a comprehensive trade agreement, increased enormously. And of course, this was for a number of raw materials where there was a sudden stop of sourcing from Russia. And the same goes for exports. So the diversification, the cushioning possibilities of an active trade policy is there, and this is why we also need to continue, especially at a time when there is more fragmentations, not least because of change in tariff and trade policy in one of our biggest trading partners, the United States, is to intensify what we can do to put trade agreements in place. And where there is clearly a delta, as I said, on the geographical zone in South and Southeast Asia, where we have active negotiations with India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, which we think can add to that capacity to absorb shocks going forward. We probably also need to have much more nimble type of trade policy approaches, investment facilitation agreement, mutual recognition at a sectoral level to deal with non-tariff obstacles to trade, strategic partnerships on critical raw materials, for example, which are very important. I want to say that, of course, the EU, as a public authority, together with member states, is acutely aware of the situation that is being created by Chinese export restrictions on rare earths and a number of other raw materials and magnets. We know exactly what is the distorting effect that's going on, and this is front and center right now of the highest level engagement with the Chinese authorities in the run-up to the EU-China summit, which is planned for the end of July. And we have been spending basically the last weeks and weekend working day and night on this question, because it is very disruptive, as you rightly say, to supply chains. I think, more generally, I think what we can do out of the EU through, let's say, this combination of trade agreements, trade frameworks, economic diplomacy, is to offer to the rest of the world a proper deal in terms of who, at the end of the day, is going to capture the value added of the green industrial transition that everybody is in the process of undertaking. And we are a trading and investment partner, which, number one, probably provides more predictability than others, and that's important. That's why people want to integrate with the single market, with the European Union. But for that, we need to become better at integrating the EU offer, so putting together market access opportunities, establishing certain rules through binding agreements, bringing investment early on, so partnering with the private sector on this. I'm thinking about Global Gateway, etc., and development cooperation, where we are a big player. So that kind of integrated offer about how do we work with the rest of the world on our green industrial transition, I think is really where the kind of external side, if you want, of underpinning European industrial competitiveness comes in.
Thank you so much. Predictability in trade and offering market access, that seems to be our strong suit right now, given the geopolitical situation. You both mentioned China, and I think this is obviously a whole other big discussion. How do we work with China? But I think the upcoming months will be very interesting ahead of the EU-China summit. Ludovico, I have a question to you as well. While pursuing these trade partnerships, how can we ensure a level playing field internationally and compliance with ESG standards? This level playing field is something that we hear both from the business side but also from the trade union side.
Yeah, so on this question, I would like to develop on two elements. First, the trade element and the level playing field, but also the counterpart is that of our dependence is that we need also to, if we want to reindustrialize, to also have a strong local demand, strong local production, and I will come back to that. But first on trades, we think that trades, in our discussions with partners, it must support fair wage, climate ambition, and social progress, so it's important that it doesn't undermine this. Especially in the context of today, we need to secure clean EU value chains, and we need and this means international trade agreements that help to enforce these high standards that I quoted. So first, it means labor rights must be enforceable in all EU trade agreements based on the ILO core conventions, of course. This is not symbolic for us, and the trade partners who want to access the EU single market must respect these basic human and labor rights. Secondly, we must implement the mandatory ESG due diligence across the full length of the global value chain. For us, this is essential because if companies are held to the social and environmental standards while the competitors abroad are not, of course, this will only penalize and have a difficult consequence on the social situation also for jobs. So we need to ensure supply chain that are clean, fair, and accountable from end to end. We know it's also difficult to control all the supply chain for a company, but we need a due diligence that is effective. So we cannot retreat the ambition on due diligence. And then trade policy should also serve global just transition. So, but I think this will link to the last question, but this means industrial partnership that also takes into account the labor rights in the transition, labor rights in decarbonation. So the discussion with partners also on climate ambition and how does it mean also that we do not replicate patterns of extraction and exploitation of the past. I think it's important that the green transition also bring these dimensions. So the second aspect for me is, yes, trade agreements based on these values and these standards, but also to allow to have less dependency, rebuilding also our industrial base. Which is, my first answer was that it was more the diminishing our industrial base than reconstructing for the moment. So it's important that, and here I would like to link, in fact, to the green transition and to bring examples. If I think about consumers, about workers as consumers, if they need to decarbonize, they need to buy heat pumps, they need to buy solar panels, they need to buy electric vehicles, and they need to renovate their house. Put this all together and sum in your country what it means that 80% of the population cannot finance this upfront. So what we cannot buy in Europe, we cannot produce it in Europe. Also, there's a clear link for us of the social difficulty of the transition and also the capacity to produce in Europe. So it means while we have recognized in the COVID-19 crisis that we had to relocate part of the production to be less dependent, in fact, we are still losing. We are losing heat pumps producers, we are losing in the automotive sector, so the element of reindustrialization is not exactly there. The intentions are there in the Clean Industrial Deal, but we need effective policies to do that. And for this, my example that I wanted to bring in the... Yeah? Okay. Yeah. Then it will be for the third question.
Thank you.
I will start with my example at the lab.
So this is something that we keep on discussing at a European level, is how we do ensure that decarbonization doesn't mean deindustrialization and doesn't mean loss of jobs. Thank you for that. I wanted to move to critical raw materials in detail. So, Bernd, I have two questions for you, and if you could try and answer both of them. So the first one is, why are raw materials supply chains particularly strategic for EU security and competitiveness? And the second one is, what needs to be done at EU level to guarantee the stability and resilience of those supply chains?
How many minutes?
Well, let's say 5.
I try to stick with this. I mean, first of all, let's be clear. Simple wisdom. Everything we care about requires raw materials. Everything we're discussing is built on raw materials. And that means we should be, first of all, very clear that with the current infrastructure and defense programs, and not them alone, but already with the captive existing demand, we do have an enormous demand for raw materials going forward. We should be aware about the multiplicators for critical and strategic raw materials when looking at renewable energy, when looking at the automotive sector, when looking at the defense sector, when looking at all this. And this comes on top as incremental demand to what we do already have. And that being said, we should be very clear that before we go into too many prosaic discussions about raw materials in general, we should be very specific how much of what, by when, from where, and how to get it here logistically. This discussion is absolutely missing. We are having a very qualitative discussion still, without very specific quantitative targets to the respective 34 critical and strategic raw materials. So that's one point, and that's why they are so important, because guess what? We are dependent, and Europe is, with the most critical raw materials, dependent from China. And our entire defense, automotive, renewable energy politics is basically in the hands of Chinese supply chains. And again, I'm not here to criticize China. It is us who let it go. So this was a deliberate decision from Europe to buy cheap. The greediness to buy cheap was basically overweighting the necessity to think strategically. So, and that being said, I think that's why raw materials are so important. The message is clear. With no raw materials or interrupted raw materials supply chains, no machines, no sovereignty, no industry, deindustrialization, prosperity, no technological advantage, and so on, I could continue. And as long as others are controlling the pricing and the logistics, they also control the political risk determination for raw material. And with this, they control our planned investments as stipulated in the Critical Raw Materials Act, as if you don't have a price control that is reflecting the European pricing mechanisms, you will not get the right amortization for your investment. So that's one part of the answer.
What do we do about this?
Sorry?
What do we do about this? This is the second.
Yeah, I mentioned
question.
this in the beginning. I mean, for me, I could continue that one, but for me, we are always saying there's kind of a 5-pillar strategy, yeah? And I mentioned this in the beginning. And the pillar 1 is very clearly that we have to now work on responsible extraction in Europe. But we should be clear where we do this. We should have this quantifiable and know which is the level of sensitivity for each of the 34 raw materials, and not drill, like in non-coordinated way, holes in the ground to do mining and extraction. We should be very clear where can we do this smartly, because keep in mind, in Saudi Arabia, there's close to $3 trillion invested into exploration and mining right now. So we should be very clear about where can we compete. The second pillar of the equation is definitely industrial circularity. And industrial circularity means that we really finally cope with the objectives that we have set in terms of recyclability and recycling targets for specific raw materials. We are missing by roughly 20% our own targets of the electronic waste regulation. That's not a very good testimony for us in Europe. And in rare earths, we are recycling less than 1%. And that means, what do we need to do? We also have to legislate for design for disassembly, mandatory to take back and traceable material streams. The third pillar is definitely, we mentioned this year a couple of times, it's about global partnerships that deliver. I've been myself part of global partnerships. We are supporting the Commission there in collaboration with DG INTPA. We are doing this in many continents. We are working together with Latin America, with Africa, with the Central Asian countries, and so on. But what is missing still is that we go beyond MOU and mission statements. So we should really lead a diplomacy of delivery here with quantifiable agreements, where again we are making binding agreements on how much of which raw materials we are focusing on, and do this in a balanced thing. Okay, I run innovation and technological sovereignty. CRMA should have a price tag. Nobody talks about the money here. What's the budget for the Critical Raw Materials Act? If you have this, you can know where you invest in. And we can't invest everything in mining, everything in recycling, everything in international partnerships, but we should have a balanced distribution of those, including also a number of how much do we want to invest in what we can do best. Europe is strong in innovation and technology. I could continue for minutes, I don't. Very important, financing. Financing is definitely here the missing bedrock, and we have to have a reliable and also blended finance system where we are supporting all those things. We have to promote also early stage financing. We have to invest also in exploration, technology, startups, and so on. So
that's great.
I stop here,
I won't
okay?
try to sum it up this time, but thank you so much for those insights. And I wanted to turn to the business side. I wanted to turn to Susanne and ask you about the optimization of supply chains. So what are the key tools to ensure a responsive and resilient supply chain at a company level, while also reducing cost? And then what can the EU have, what can the EU do to turn those practices into something that is well regarded and well used?
Good, and of course there are many tools where EU can support us, and I have again 3 things on my mind. We are a multinational company. We are selling our products in 60 different markets. We are sourcing and producing from 50 different markets. So it's global, and it's complex today. Then, of course, global rule-based open then trade, as led out by WTO, is very critical for us and fundamental in the way that is really giving us opportunities. And I really would like to also emphasize the importance of building strong relationships with key trading partners. And here also, again, then great support from the EU Commission in this field, so thankful for that. But we need really strong institutions that support fairness and enforce the rules against limitations in market access. That is critical for us. Secondly, a strong European Union and a clear regulatory environment is also very, very important for us. And we are welcoming the harmonization of the legislations in the European market. What is also very important is the harmonization when it comes to the implementation and the reinforcement of the legislation in the end in the different European countries. If not that is happening, that is creating a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of administration, and it creates then barriers and disruptions in our supply chain that in the end creates increased cost and also will impact the consumer in the end. Areas where we are impacted today is, for instance, in packaging, in labeling, specific specifications on that. Then thirdly, we are also welcoming, of course, the simplification and the ambition to simplify part of the sustainability related requirements. But we also would like to acknowledge the fact that it is important then to balance that simplification also with continued emphasis on the reporting side and on the due diligence side. We have in IKEA, we are celebrating 25 years today with our own supply code of conduct, the IWay we call it, where we have been working with traceability in our supply chain for many years, 25 years now. And we are also taking the next steps now to really go further upstream in our value chain. And we are working with a risk-based due diligence approach, and that is important for us. We need the data from our suppliers and our supply chains, not only to meet legislation, but to make sure that our activities have the minimal impact on the environment and also secure that we secure human rights. And for many times in our supply chains, the risk doesn't sit in the first tier and not in the second tier, but further up or back than in the supply chain. So for us to work together with our partners, we have 1,500 partners all over the world. We have the same requirements for all of those. We work in the same way with them together to secure our supply chains, and I think that is important. And by securing really the traceability part, we are not only making sure that we follow legislations, but we are making sure that we do a better business. and that we really can have a positive impact in the activities that we have connected to our supply chain.
Great, thank you. And I must say that the IWay is a well-recognized mechanism also outside of IKEA, and I think a lot of companies can learn from your experience. But I also wanted to ask you about decarbonization and circularity. This is something that IKEA has been working on for quite some time. So how can circularity be used as a competitive advantage at business level? But also at the same time supporting EU's economic security?
So in IKEA, we are committed to supplying products with circular capabilities and greatly also then reduce our climate footprint. I already mentioned the ambitions we have when it comes to that. And of course, we have in IKEA, we have an integrated value chain where we can really from the design phase of the products make sure that we use the right material, the right raw material, sustainable, recycled and renewable. We can also make sure that we design our products for recyclability and for disassemble, for instance, when it comes to the bigger furniture. And also make sure that we use the right production technologies and also the right both replenishment and fulfillment solutions for it. And that we also make sure that we design so that we can take back goods in them. So that is important. It's also important, circularity is also about reducing, and we have high ambitions to really decouple our growth from the utilization of the materials. So doing much more from less. And with the less and with the materials we still use, that will be from renewable and recycled sources. Then again, I think on the material side, we are building up capacities now when it comes to recycled materials, and both from post-industrial, but also from post-consumer. And as I said before, our focus is really on the wood side now. We are a big consumer, even though we really try to minimize that impact of wood in our furniture. And the recycled wood is one of the biggest focuses we have, but also when it comes to metals, when it comes to textiles. And here we have a need to really build the infrastructure for that also in Europe now. And then finally, we are also going for zero waste production, of course. We want to make sure that we have nothing that goes to waste also in the manufacturing part.
Thank you. That's really interesting, and especially for me, the taking back that product part, because it's really changing the business model. Thank you. So Ludovico, a question for you. 3 minutes, a simple question, probably a difficult answer. How can we guarantee a just transition for EU workers?
Yeah, so just transition for us is the key ambition for trade unions. The problem is that, well, the feeling that workers have is that transition is happening, or might be also not happening in some part, but that there's a path to transition, but that is unfair because there are these restructuring, etc. So there's distress, there's unfairness, and there's the feeling, and there's also a lot of anger in a lot of regions against the feeling of being left behind, and we need to fix that. We need to deliver this transition in a fair way. This comes to my example, which I wanted to bring, is for 3 days ago, a Dutch company in France producing heat pumps said they would restructure and fire 300 workers. This go in my mind, without commenting if the business case, and I don't know what's happening in this company, but this goes completely against the trend we should have in terms of the Clean Industrial Deal of building our autonomy in strategic industries for the decarbonation. Heat pumps are part of it. So we have a problem there, is that the market has shifted. This is the argument that is brought by the management there. Yes, but the market cannot shift. We need to have the policy that the market cannot shift on heat pumps. We need to have the supporting policies that makes that workers can remain in this industry. These redundancies should not, in fact, happen. And it's coming 2 years after the 2 main French producers of heat pumps also closed. So it means that our dependency here, it's increasing. So this means that for us, just transition is about also anticipation, having the supporting policies, And this is where it's essential for us, it's anticipation. Anticipation should be done with trade unions, should be done with workers. They have to be at the discussing with the managers, what does it mean decarbonation? What does it mean for the 2030 target, 2040 target, 2050 target in this company? What does it mean in terms of job change? If they are, the less possible, if possible. If they are job changes, can they move in the same sector, because this is the easiest path to retrain people. And if they don't need to change job, but that they just have to be reskilled, how do we plan this in 5 years, 10 years, etc.? But for this, we need companies to have strategies of decarbonation and to make the choices. And for this, also, we need companies to have the supporting environment in terms of investment from the EU, from member states, from the regional authorities to allow these investments. But for this, workers, for the moment, are a little bit left behind because they cannot really input in the insecure environment. So just transition has to be about anticipation of change, has to be about preparation of making the decarbonation possible, allowing the necessary investment, allowing the reskilling, allowing the job protection also of these jobs in the regions, because it's the regional dimension, I think, is essential. When a region lose thousands of jobs, you see the political consequence of that. You see the economic consequence, of course, of that. So this is something we think that with the member states, with the EU, with the employers and the trade unions, we need to fix with a governance that works well from the ground to the European level of the European Green Deal that really works. For the moment, the European Green Deal doesn't really deliver the fair transition that we need.
Thank you. Anticipation, preparation, and there's a clear role for EU. I'm not sure if we have any questions from the public through Slido. I cannot see any questions on the screen. Oh, now you have the QR code, so if you want to join and ask questions, we'll probably see them at the screen. I cannot see them here at the iPad, but okay, so while we wait for the questions, we only have 7 minutes remaining. I would like all of us to get a chance to sum up, but first I wanted to ask Denis the last question, really. What is the role of trade policy in reinforcing the EU's industrial capabilities? You've talked about that a bit, but to get more into the detail, thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, to make that really short, because it's a bit broad question, two things. One is that we need to understand, and we understand trade policy. So what, again, the European Union is doing in its capacity as a state here in relation with the rest of the world, when it puts the single market in relation with the rest of the global economy, it's an enabling policy, right? It's not trade policy for the sake of trade policy or the sake of concluding trade agreement. It has to be an enabling policy to the global competitiveness of, in particular, European industrial sectors. And so it's got to be consistent in a suite of not only microeconomic policies, some of them taken forward at national level, some of them taken forward at EU level, which are all geared towards that objective. And it's very clear that the new European Commission has reorganized itself around that notion, integrating differently, frankly, than we were doing in the past, trade, industry, research, technology policy, competition policy, number one. Number two is basically what Susanne said. We can provide a framework for our economic fabric, which is open trade with rules. Emphasis with rules. Those relating to the sustainability of our trade, broadly speaking. And also, not just diversification, but also protection against unlevel playing field. There are distortions to the level playing field. And we are intensely relaxed about saying we have a tool to address these where necessary through trade protection, either structural against non-market policies and practices, creating global overcapacities in key industrial sectors where we take action, anti-dumping, anti-subsidies in key sectors, and even if necessary, trade contingent protection if we head in the next few months into a world where, because there is fragmentation that is being created, we would be faced with injurious surges of imports that threaten the industrial base in Europe. Yesterday, the Commission put out to the public a first tool to show how we are taking forward this surveillance of imports at this particular critical juncture, where we have, of course, a certain upending of tariff policy worldwide. So that's also something that we're doing. And by the way, we're intensely relaxed about doing this and convinced that this is not going to lead into any kind of protectionist sort of approach to our external relations, because we are investigations based. We look at the European Union interest, including at the competitiveness of the downstream industries, if and when we have to protect at some level some of the upstream industries, which we do.
So again, level playing field was really the key of what you said. Thank you so much. So now we have a chance for all of our panelists to summarize, to give their closing statements. Susanne, let's start with you.
No, I just want to emphasize again the importance of, as Denis said as well, the importance of having really global rule-based open trade. So we support that, and that is important for us, for our business model as well, and I believe for many other retailers. And then again, we are working together, and I think in today's world, we cannot act alone. We need to work and go together in the complete ecosystem when it comes to really accelerating investments in automation, in robotics, but also when it comes to really securing the feedstock and the sustainable feedstock for the future. And together really work on strengthening Europe's then competitive advantages as industry market.
Thank you. Bernd?
Yes, I mean, first of all, from a raw materials standpoint, we should be aware that we have to discontinue our current back-end loaded dialogue. We're always talking about 2030, 2035, 2040. Stop, guys. Let's start acting. I mean, we need to have a milestone operationalization, time-bound action plan to execute things. So that's a general remark that I think needs to be done. Second, more related to raw materials, is that we have to embed raw materials into a European strategic DNA today. And that means three things. First of all, we have to prioritize raw materials also in the next EU budget. Second, the partnerships must be turned into bankable ventures as opposed to just being signed MOUs. And the Critical Raw Materials Act must be enforced based on the 5 pillars I mentioned before: extraction, recycling, innovation, skills, and logistics included there, together with innovation and technology, supported by finance. And let's be aware, we have 1,700 days and less time until 2030. So let's go and run.
Thank you. And there's a question from the public, and I'll answer it because we don't have much time. How do you see dependencies that the EU has on third countries, especially China? I think it was quite clear that we are not happy about those dependencies, especially on China. Sorry for making it so quick, but we simply don't have time. So, Ludovico.
Yeah, to close, I think trade tools were discussed, but I think trade tools doesn't mean also job protection. It can lead to job protection, but it's not a job protection tool in itself. So when you retaliate against tariffs that are put by the US, it doesn't mean there's no effect on jobs. So trade tools can be done, yes, but then you need also the job protection tools. And maybe finally on China, 2 ideas that we can also take from China. In the automotive sector, they have a mandatory 70% local content, Chinese content in the automotive that they produce. Why can't we have also this kind of protection? And it would not be protectionist because they are doing it. And secondly, they did in the past. Why they are so strong now? Because they did also technology transfer. Why can't we, in the foreign investment that we attract to the EU, also do technology transfer in order to produce in the long term in the EU?
Great, thank you. And the last minute to Denis.
Well, this is exactly what we are seeking to do very clearly in key sectors of the transition, or to be the automotive electrification. Commission has been very clear about this very recently. I think I agree. So number one, that trade policy is not just to protect. You want economic resilience, you need to protect, you need to promote your industry and partner with others. It's the basic pillars of our economic security strategy, and they're the correct ones, and you need a balance between this, because if not, if you're imbalanced, if you do too much protect, not enough promote, it doesn't quite work, it doesn't deliver the industrial jobs in Europe. Completely agree. Third, I think as public authorities, national, EU, are well inspired to provide some degree of structural responses with some degree of predictability, because that's also something in the current context that I think our economic fabric needs, whilst at the same time being reactive to reality around us and fast enough to react around us. And if we are faced with trade diversion, if we are faced with weaponization of certain dependencies, we have to be able to react and put the heft of the single market behind those reactions, including between the EU and some of our biggest trading partners.
Thank you. We're over time, so I won't be trying to summarize. I'm just going to say that this panel and the whole discussion we had was very much in line with a lot of discussions that we had during the Polish presidency. Thank you so much to my panelists. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.